Now, when I drove the Smart #1 Premium back in December, I said that the #1 was the best transitioning EV for people moving from ICE vehicles to EVs simply because the app and the built-in navigation allows you to drive absolutely stress and range anxiety free. However, since then, I've also driven the BYD Seal, which was a car that was so impressive for the money that I declared it better than anything else that you can buy within the luxury compact saloon space. Now, Smart wasn't very happy with that, which is why they called me and said, hey, why don't you take out our #1 Brabus and then see how you feel? Well, I've spent a week with this car, I've charged it several times, taken a couple of long distance trips, and well, my name is AIMAN ABDULLAH, this is Malaysian Motoring, this is our review of the 2024 Smart #1 Brabus. So some of you may be wondering what is the difference between the #1 Premium and the #1 Brabus. Aside from a 20,000 ringgit premium, the majority of the differences come from what's under the skin. So both cars run the same identical 66 kilowatt hour NMC battery, replete with the same 150 kilowatt DC charging and 22 kilowatt AC charging, the latter being very notable because it means that you can charge this car from dead to full in just 3 hours via a 22 kilowatt socket, if you can find one. The biggest difference, however, is in terms of performance, because while the Premium can go from 0 to 100 in about 5.5, under 6 seconds, this can do it just 3.9. Now, for 240,000 ringgit, this makes this easily one of the most affordable ways to hit 100 kilometers an hour from rest in under 4 seconds. Although the BYD Seal Premium will have a lot to say about that. Now, because both cars run the same battery, both Smart #1s run the same battery, it does mean that there is a difference in terms of range, because the Brabus can only do 400 kilometers on the WLTP cycle, whereas the #1 Premium will do 440. And I will say that those numbers are relatively realistic, although it is ultimately dependent on how heavy your right foot is. Now, of course, the additional 20 grand doesn't just get you the dual motor setup. It also gets you a few blink and you'll miss it aesthetic changes. So for starters, up front, you get these dual fake vents up here, which again do absolutely nothing. The Smart badge is now done up in black. You get red accents along the lower grille, which also comes with a red lighting system compared to the white that you get in the regular Smart #1. Although the lights around the grille only switch on when the car locks, unlocks, and when you put it in light show mode. You also get a little bit of red down by the front splitter, as well as a small Brabus badge, and that is mostly it, for the front at least. And that's perfectly fine, because as standard you still get the Matrix LED headlights, which Smart calls Cyber Smarts LEDs, which I think look quite smart. You also get different 19-inch alloy wheels. The #1 Premium also runs 19 inches, but only the Brabus get this lovely diamond face finish to it, which I think looks absolutely spectacular. And rolling stock is handled by a set of Dunlop SP Sport Max tires. Moving down the side, you get more red accents along that lower skirt, which is again standard on all #1s. It just comes with a red lining for the Brabus. The other thing that I'd like to point out is this paint. This is Atom Grey Matte with a lovely red roof. This dual tone setup is standard again on most #1s, namely the Premium and the Brabus, but for the Atom Grey Matte paint, you will be paying an additional 5,000 ringgit. That said, however, I do think that it is an expense worthwhile, because the number of looks I've gotten in this, aided by the overall design and of course this matte paint, is pretty invaluable. And of course, here we find one of my favorite features on the car, not the floating roof, which I think looks like a baseball cap worn backwards, but this, the little Smart logo here, because it lights up and it pulses when you lock and unlock the car. And it's just little things like this that really do my head in, because why can't it just be on all the time? Why only limited? I know it's a JPJ thing, but damn it. Now on the back of the hashtag one Brabus, again you get a little bit more red down at the bottom of the rear bumper, as well as a very discreet Brabus badge down here, and of course the smart and hashtag one badging is also done up in black. As standard, you get full width LED tail lights, which I think look spectacular, and they also have a lovely animation sequence again when you lock and unlock the car. Same thing goes with the light bar in the front, and it is worth noting that you can actually customize that light sequence between 2 or 3 different options depending on what you prefer. Now there's also scrolling indicators front and rear, and of course you get this lovely little spoiler here, which I think looks quite neat. Now behind this tailgate, which is electrically powered on the Brabus as well as the Premium, you get a pretty decent amount of space. Now I know that a lot of you looking at this will say that doesn't seem like much, but you can fit 4 cabin-sized luggages without issue. On top of that, underneath the boot floor, there is actually a pretty decent amount of space as well. At least it is certainly big enough for you to put all of your cables, the V2L system, as well as a few other things, despite that space being encroached upon by the subwoofer for the Beats audio system. And as you can see, this does fold in quite nicely, and you can actually fit the parcel shelf underneath the boot floor, which is certainly very appreciated. That said, at least this boot floor is nice and level with the lip, which means there is nothing for you to lift over a lip to get in and out of. And of course, this space is not very big, which means that you won't really risk scuffing your car that much as you put or pull out luggage in and out of the boot. Now, if you ask me, the hashtag one is clearly a very well-designed vehicle on the outside. I think that this car certainly looks more distinctive than almost anything else out on the road, and every time I walk away from it, I do find myself looking back because I still think this looks like a concept car. But it's actually inside where I think they've pulled a real hat-trick. And that's because this car was designed by Mercedes-Benz, which is why the exterior is as whimsical as it is without looking a little bit too showy, and that's why this interior presents itself very nicely. And because this car was designed by Mercedes-Benz, that's also why I have somewhere to hide my sunglasses. Now, the thing about the hashtag one is that because this is very much meant to be a brand new car for a relaunched, re-emerging brand, it means that the design language that we saw in the past from Smart was completely thrown out the window and reworked entirely for this new generation of vehicle, which is why we no longer have funny air conditioning vents and dials that seem to pop out from the dash like a set of eyes on an alien. Instead, everything is very nicely integrated. So for starters, we have this massive free-floating central touchscreen which controls the majority of your functions, which unfortunately also includes your climate functionalities, although those are relatively easily accessible because for the most part they remain at the bottom part of the screen. Now, in terms of the interface, everything responds very, very quickly, and of course the graphics of this car are fantastic because this screen has one of the most PPI dense screens I've ever seen on an automotive application. The same can also be said of the instrument cluster screen, which is this small sort of pillbox size screen right in the middle, right in the driver's line of sight, which is not only excellent to look at, but it's also very easy to manipulate. Now, because the majority of the functions are controlled via the central screen, everything that you see here is just related to sort of trip and stuff like that. Settings and so on are controlled from here. On top of that, if these two screens are not enough, I also have a full color heads-up display which can show me even more information, things like my navigation, for example, as well as my current speed, as well as any warnings that it might need to tell me should there be a vehicle in my blind spot. This is very similar to what we've seen before from the latest generation Mazda systems, which I think is absolutely excellent. Now, in terms of the controls, I will note that there are some parts of this car that I don't necessarily agree with. So for starters, while my window controls and my door lock controls are available here, there's also a door lock and unlock function available on the screen. Therefore, it is accessible to the front passenger. However, if I want to adjust my mirrors, for example, that is in the screen. If I want to change the memory settings for my seat, or indeed the mirrors themselves, that's also in the screen. Now, this does take some getting used to. However, the Smart Hashtag one can save multiple profiles to the same car, which means at least if you're sharing this car, you just have to select your profile when you get in. Now, in terms of outward visibility, because this car has a very decent glass house, it's very easy to see out of. You have great visibility even over the shoulder thanks to that relatively elongated glass house design back there. On top of that, you have this lovely sort of frameless rear view mirror, which gives me an excellent view out the rear. And so everything is relatively easy to get used to. And also setting up the steering wheel is also quite easy because you do have reach and rake adjustment for a pretty decent amount, which means that again it's very easy to find a comfortable driving position. Aiding that are the fact that these two front seats are not only powered but also ventilated, which means that in addition to having lumbar support, etc., where you can get very comfortable over a longer distance, you can also reduce fatigue by having those ventilated seats. Now, I did drive this car over relatively long distance and I can say that it is very comfortable, and of course the standard fit Beats audio system certainly made life a lot better too. Now, in terms of other interior accoutrements and practical aspects, you have a large bin here thanks to this floating center console. You have a wireless charger here, a couple of USB-C ports, a couple of cup holders here, a nice little slot for you to hide your phone, as well as a cooled, air-conditioned center console space here, which means that you can put sandwiches or drinks and they should remain quite cool. And because you don't actually get speakers on the door cards themselves, it also means that you have this absolutely enormous space for you to put very, very large bottles. And in fact, I have actually fit a 13-inch MacBook in here without too much issue. So again, this is all very, very good. And like I said, everything is as you'd expect. You have a decently sized glove box, and what more do you want? Now, in the back of the Hashtag 1, I do appreciate this full glass panoramic sunroof, which comes with an electric sunblind, Tesla and BYD, which means that when the weather is permitting, I can open it, and then when the sun comes back out, I can just close it without having to stop my car and faff about with a sunshade for 10 minutes. Now, that aside, I do have a pretty good amount of space back here. Because the Hashtag 1 is sort of like this hatchbacky, crossover-y type affair, it means that the floor isn't ridiculously high, which means that without really stretching out that far, I have very decent under-thigh support, and with this seat set in my driving position, I'm about 170-ish centimeters. I have a good amount of knee room and a pretty decent amount of headroom. And of course, because the front seats are mounted quite high, I can tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me, so if you have friends who are longer limbed, they shouldn't have any issues in this at all. And of course, the quality back here is just as good as it is up front. So you have this lovely vinyl that covers the majority of the parts that you hold, and even the plastics that you have to hold on to are of a nice quality. I will decry, however, that these parts of the plastic, not just in the back but also in the front, are very, very scratchy. And the same can be said of the cowling around the crotch coolers in the middle here, because this is very emblematic of Mercedes-Benz. And I wish that Geely had done something about that, because this is just... Now, underneath that, at least, you do get a USB-C and USB-A port, as well as a ridiculous little cubby hole underneath that should you want to hide a phone or something. And of course, you do have a centrally mounted armrest here with a couple of cup holders, replete with a ski hatch or a pass-through should you have longer items you need to carry along in the car. Now, as standard, all Hashtag 1s come with rear tint. Now, this is especially useful for people who want to use this car as a family vehicle, because obviously UV rays coming in could be a little bit dangerous or hazardous to the health of young children. Now, I mentioned that because obviously this car comes with a couple of ISOFIX mounts back here, as well as an ISOFIX mount for the front seat, which means if you have a bulky rear-facing child seat, you now have the option of putting it in the front seat instead, which would then allow more comfort, or more space rather, for adult passengers. So for example, if you have two kids, you can put a front-facing one here and a rear-facing one there, and put one parent behind the wheel and one parent back here, and everyone will be happy. Now, aside from that, there isn't really much to talk about back here because, well, it's the back end of a car. And besides, this is a Hashtag 1 Brabus, so these red seat belts are more indicative of how much fun you can have over there. Now, the thing about the Hashtag 1 Brabus is that this is ultimately the performance variant, which is why you get a whisker under 550 Newton meters of torque, which is why this car can go from 0 to 100 in under 4 seconds. This is certainly not a slow car by any measure. But the thing about performance like this is it does require a certain degree of, let's say, mechanical capability. Now, mercifully, this car does come as standard with Dunlop SP Sport Max tires, which do a very good job at harnessing and maintaining control over all that performance, which is why over the week I've had this, at no point have I been able to spin the wheels or lose traction even under full acceleration from rest. So this is all certainly very positive. But there is something of a detriment in terms of the handling, which we will get to shortly. because there is a lot more that we have to talk about before we get there. So for starters, as I mentioned earlier, these seats are incredibly comfortable, and so on an overcast day like this, I can have my sunroof open, I have my ventilated seat going, I've got my climate control doing all that it needs to do, and so I'm in a very serene environment. And driving around town, the Smart #1 is indeed a very serene place to be. There is a fake or virtual engine noise system available in this car, but honestly, I don't really use it because EVs are all about that silence, and so I just want to hear nothing. And driving around in this at urban speeds, it really does just highlight the capabilities of EVs. Twice over this weekend, I got caught in very, very long, very tedious traffic jams, and because this being an electric car, I had no engine noise, there was no rumble, no vibration. It meant that going through traffic was an absolute breeze. It took nothing out of me. I just sort of let the car do everything that it needed to do. And on top of that, because of the Beats audio system, it does also mean that I can enjoy my music while I'm stuck in traffic. Again, all of this is all very, very positive. And the #1, given the size, given the package, this is ultimately supposed to be an urban cruiser, and I have to say it does the urban cruise very well indeed. The only trouble is once you get up to motorway speed. So because this car is very fast, you would think that it would also be very adept at the motorway cruise, particularly given the fact that the BYD Seal that we reviewed last week was particularly adept at higher speed cruising in terms of NVH and so on. The trouble is in this car, when you encroach on speeds beyond 120 kilometers an hour, things start falling apart a little bit, because while wind noise is relatively well suppressed, which is quite impressive given the fact that this car does not come with acoustic glass on any of these windows except perhaps maybe the windscreen, but wind noise is relatively well suppressed. The issue actually arises from tire noise, because I have noticed that the wheel wells of this car are only lined in plastic and not in some kind of fabric, which is what you get in higher end vehicles, and so that plus the high performance tires have led to a scenario where you do get quite a bit of tire roar, certainly more than I would expect from anything claiming to be a premium vehicle. However, I must temper expectations because it really isn't that bad. It's just a little bit noisier than I expected. If you're used to vehicles like the Mercedes-Benz C-Class or indeed even the Mercedes-Benz GLA or GLB, then I think this would still fall well within your expectations. It's just that from EVs, we have gotten very used to cars running absolutely silently, which means as soon as there is any degree of noise encroachment, it becomes a noticeable issue. But when the traffic eventually slows down, because it always seems to one way or another, at least this car comes chock full of semi-autonomy systems. So Smart claims that the #1 comes with level 2.5 semi-autonomy, and that's because in addition to things like traffic jam assist and adaptive cruise control and stuff like that, the #1 also comes with a lane change assistant. This means that the car will be able to identify which lane it needs to enter by hitting the indicator stalk, and then when it is safe to do so, the vehicle will maneuver on its own. This to me certainly feels like it is on par with premium vehicles, because the only other cars I've driven with a lane change assistant are high-end Mercedes-Benzes and BMWs, which means again this is a very adept system. But when you're not trying to change lanes, you're just stuck in traffic, I appreciate the fact that the pillbox display in front of me shows me what the car can see and therefore allows me to have greater faith and trust in the system. And for the most part, it does a pretty good job, because when I'm stuck in traffic, it maintains a very natural and reasonable distance to the vehicle in front. It accelerates and brakes in a very natural and progressive manner, which means progress is smooth and comfortable. And even when you're out on the motorway, if a vehicle were to cut in front of you very suddenly, the car reacts in a very natural fashion. It is not too far off the way I would react behind the wheel, and so as far as I'm concerned, it is a very easy system to live with. And given that the majority of #1 customers are people who drive in urban settings most of the time, it does mean that it takes away a lot of the strain of getting stuck in traffic. So while the NVH in this car is not that great, it is for the most part still livable and reasonable nonetheless. But it's actually the ride and handling that I've left to almost the very end, because I do think that is something worth discussing. Now, when we talk about performance variants of cars, normally we do see some changes in terms of the suspension setup. That is largely in order to ensure that the vehicle can manage that performance. And for the #1, we expected Smart to have done just that. given the fact that Geely has made some performance cars under Lynk & Co, as well as Polestar, as well as the fact that Mercedes-Benz themselves and Brabus know what they're talking about when it comes to performance vehicles. Unfortunately, for the #1, they decided that Brabus just meant fast, because for the Brabus variant, all you get is a dual motor setup. The suspension in the front has been altered ever so slightly in order to manage the extra weight of the motor on the front axle, but aside from that, nothing has changed. The brakes have not been upgraded, the suspension and dampers are still exactly the same as what you get from the #1 Premium, and as a result, the ride and handling is very similar between both cars. So for starters, it drives and rides like a European vehicle in the sense that it's never crashy or uncomfortable, but it doesn't feel as floaty as what you get from certain Asian competitors. That certainly provides confidence when you're driving on the motorway, or cruising rather. But this is a Brabus, which means being a Brabus, I certainly expect it to have a little bit more chops when it comes to B-road barnstorming. And unfortunately, that is where I think this car slightly falls apart. Simply because when you're taking on tighter, twistier, narrower roads where you need the car to be able to flick left and right, particularly something this powerful, it doesn't do that very well. The suspension is a little bit too soft to manage that. I feel that if they had gone for a suspension setup similar to what we've seen from, say, Toyota GR Sport cars, then this car would have been a right riot to drive, because the performance is certainly there. It's just that the dynamic chops are not quite aligned, which is, again, very unfortunate, because I would have had a lot of fun in this. That said, you can simply adopt the mindset of slow in, fast out. Brake before the corner, cruise through it, and then power as soon as you can see the exit. And if you were to do that, then the #1 Brabus is pretty decent. But I still maintain that this is a car that was very clearly developed and engineered and designed for use in urban settings, because I feel that that is where this car does its absolute best. So again, bringing it back to urban speeds, everything in here is quiet and serene and wonderful, and this is exactly what you'd expect from a car like this competing within this space. So to me, the #1 feels a bit too accurately positioned, because if you're looking for an urban car, then the #1, Brabus or otherwise, still puts forward a very, very strong proposition. This car is quiet, it's comfortable, it's reasonable, and on top of that, because of the fact this car is co-developed with Mercedes-Benz, it's also sold in Malaysia through various Mercedes-Benz dealers, which is why buying a #1 is a very premium experience. No Tesla-like nonsense here where you have to register the car yourself and get your own number plate and do your own insurance. No. Smart will handle everything for you, as you'd expect when you buy a Myvi, let alone something that is, again, co-developed by Mercedes-Benz. And so because of that ownership experience as well as the after-sales experience of this car, for those who are looking to buy into a premium vehicle for the first time, this will certainly give you the experience that you expect, unlike a Tesla. However, I will note that the fact that this car only does about 400 kilometers on a charge, which in the real world with my driving looks a little bit more like 350 to 375, may be a bit off-putting for some of you. Again, if you're driving this car as an urban cruiser, then you will have no issues and you're more likely to appreciate the 22 kilowatt AC charger that this car comes with. However, if you do find yourself traveling a little bit more often, then you might want a little bit more in terms of range as well as battery capacity. And so for customers like that, I would advise looking at vehicles like the BYD Seal or indeed the Omoda E5, because both of these cars, while the Seal has a bigger battery, the Omoda has slightly better range than this, although both cars do have their drawbacks. The Omoda E5, for example, only DC charges at 80 kilowatts, whereas the BYD Seal will only AC charge at up to 7 kilowatts. So again, there are pros and cons. So I think that for long distance cruisers, you may be better served in a BYD Seal. For urban drivers, I do think the #1 presents a very premium experience, no matter how you cut it. Having been a former owner of several BMWs and several Mercedes-Benzes, all of which were bought used, but still serviced officially, I can tell you that paying for that experience certainly comes with benefits. And so if that's the sort of experience that you're looking for, or if that's the experience that you're used to, then this is more likely going to be the better car for you compared to vehicles like the Tesla Model 3, for example, or indeed even the BYD Seal, because of course the Seal is BYD's most premium product. Prior to this, the Dolphin and the Atto 3 compete in the mass EV segment, which means that they may not necessarily be that adept at managing premium grade customers, although they are still a member of Sime Darby, which means they shouldn't be that bad. But overall, I think that the #1 Brabus has been a fantastic experience because I have enjoyed every moment I've had this. I've enjoyed using the app, I've enjoyed using the charger, I've enjoyed everything about this car. It's just a little bit more wind noise, a little bit more road roar. Nothing I couldn't live with. And that's certainly why we continue to recommend this car ever so brilliantly, because the product itself is fantastic, the technology is great, the app ensures that you never have to use another charging app ever again, and the built-in navigation basically zero rises range anxiety. If you'd like to know what the #1 is like to drive long distance, check out our video taking this car from KL to Penang and back again. And of course, if you'd like to know more about the Smart #1 Premium, we've also done a review of that. But in any case, that has been our comprehensive review of the #1 Brabus. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below, and you can join our new WhatsApp group so that you never miss an update from us. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.